Dear educators and parents, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's with my absolute pleasure to welcome today's guest, an award-winning author whose words have touched hearts and inspired young readers across the globe. Ms. Shifa Safadi is the celebrated author of multiple children's and middle grade books, including her National Book Award-winning novel, Kareem Between, a powerful story that explores identity, resilience, and justice through the eyes of a Syrian American boy. Her works, such as Spell It Like Summer, Heaven at Mama's Feet, and Pepperoni, and other problems, have been praised for their authenticity, warmth, and ability to give Muslim children the gift of seeing themselves in literature. Born in Syria and raised in the United States, Ms. Shifa brings a unique perspective shaped by her own experiences as an immigrant, an educator, and a mother of four. She holds a degree in English literature, has taught English language arts, and is a passionate advocate for diverse representation in children's publishing. Her commitment to empowering young readers doesn't stop with her books through school visits, workshops, and speaking engagements. She inspires children to embrace their voices, their stories, and their heritage. With exciting new projects like her upcoming Amina Banana chapter book series, Ms. Shifa continues to bring joy, humor, and representation to classrooms and homes everywhere. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest, Ms. Shifa Safadi. The mic is yours. Barakallah feek.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for coming. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking a little bit about literacy and the importance of reading for young Muslim children. So I did teach middle school English for a few years, as well as being an author, and I've always been an avid reader. So this is a very near and dear conversation for me, and something that is really something I find important, and I hope that inshallah you all hopefully learn, and inshallah. So I'm going to begin with a literacy presentation, giving you guys statistics about literacy, reading, in general statistics about reading in America, and then delve a little bit about Muslim fiction. And then there are some prepared questions that Noorart provided. I'm going to try to answer some of them, and then open the chat for you guys to send questions. If you guys want to drop questions in the chat from now, you feel free to do so. I will try to take a look at it once the presentation's over, and also, just in case, so you don't forget your questions, and we can answer them as much as possible, inshallah. And so let's begin. Okay. So obviously, subhanAllah, the first word in the Quran that was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Iqra. And, reading is just so important. And, ilm, knowledge is just so important for Muslim kids, for all of us, in fact. There's so many ahadith. One of my favorite ahadith about, knowledge as ibadah is, verily the angels lower their wings for the seeker of knowledge. The inhabitants of the heavens and earth, even the fish in the depths of the water, seek forgiveness for the scholar. The virtue of the scholar over the worshipper is like the superiority of the moon over the stars. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. They do not leave behind gold or silver coins, but rather they leave behind knowledge. Whoever has taken a hold of it has been given an abundant share. And this is from Sunan Abi Dawud. So, knowledge, I mean, subhanAllah, we've heard it so many times. I know I grew up hearing about knowledge. And, so often our communities, focus on, becoming doctors or engineers or, lawyers, and which are definitely, undoubtedly great pursuits of education, as well as scholars and readers. But I think we, a little bit of along the way, some of us might have forgotten, the foundation of knowledge, which is reading. And this is kind of where my presentation delves into the importance of reading, why reading is the building block of seeking knowledge, and therefore is so important for Muslim kids. So benefits of reading, It helps kids develop cognitive thinking, which is critical thinking, problem solving, decision making. So being an avid reader means you're developing your empathy, you're reading these stories, you start to, follow along and expand your worldview beyond just what you experience. And you start to think, of situations, different situations. So for example, in my book, Getting Between, it's about a young boy who experiences his mother going to Syria, and he makes decisions, not always the right ones. So I've gotten many children that have come up to me and told me, this really made us think about like what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, how mistakes can have an impact. So it takes you out of that bubble and gets you to start critically thinking and thinking about like, if I was in a certain situation, how would I act, which prepares you for life. Language development. The average kindergartner should have been read to, and if they are read to, then they develop 1 million more words and vocabulary, which is so important, especially in these times and age where it seems like kindergarten curriculum has become more strenuous. Reading at home with children from an early age is strongly correlated with brain activation in areas connected with visual imagery and understanding language. Students who are exposed to reading before preschool are more likely to do well when they reach their period of formal education. In fact, I believe there is a study that by kindergarten and by first grade, that kids who read and are able to read well, it correlates directly with their success in later life. And that the predictions, in fact, the prison system in America uses test predictions from kindergarten because they will know how many kids based on kindergarten testing might end up, in the prison system, which obviously is a for-profit prison system. So they will use that to kind of, plan for the future and knowing, because education is a roadblock, necessary thing in terms of keeping, citizens and people, out of prison. So that will kind of, it's all related. I mean, reading is so important, even from a kindergarten age, even from such a young age when you might not think about it. Reading creates bonds between parents and children, especially with story time before bed. It helps create empathy and kindness, right? When you step out of your worldview, you're able to think about other children. It reduces bullying in children. It helps children focus for longer periods of time, especially nowadays with TikTok, with TV, with YouTube. Reading can help get children into, the habit of focusing on learning for a long period of time. And reading from a young age also, which I think is the most important thing for me, it helps them find pleasure in reading. Because if you can get a child to love reading on their own, then that will get them to continue to build that pathway in their brain and continue to seek out books and read. Even when you're not telling them, they will have that habit built into them and will continue to hold that on later in their life. So current literacy in the USA, and I actually made this presentation about 2 years ago. So honestly, it probably has even declined since then. 34% of students in the 4th grade lack a basic reading level, and 31% are below proficient reading level. And about 30% of 8th grade students are below basic reading level. I honestly would argue it's much lower. When I was teaching middle school, I definitely noticed this. I have children myself that are in high school, middle school, as well as 1st grade, 2nd grade. And honestly, I had noticed when I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that many students in that grade were honestly not progressing past the 1st grade level. They would read very similarly to my own child who was in 1st grade because unfortunately, with COVID, that kind of kept a lot of kids at home, which, affected kids. It stressed out parents. It was very difficult to teach. But also, I think kids are just not reading for fun anymore. And strenuous curriculums at school are leaving teachers scrambling to try to teach facts instead of, teaching the love of reading. So students who are behind in literacy are more likely to repeat grades. And it's a major factor in, adolescents graduating from high school. Unfortunately, high school dropout is increasing. And in fact, the state I live in, Indiana, actually introduced a recent diploma where, kids would just not even have to take all the required courses to graduate, that you could just graduate without, even being literate. And I believe even college educated students, there was a report from Harvard that, college educated students cannot complete reading one book. And that is just really, really sad, the literacy rates of how, low they've gone. So it's very, very concerning. And, if you notice this, whether you're an educator or a parent, if you're noticing this and you're concerned, you are not alone. And these, statistics are just really, unfortunately, reflecting the majority of students, and, definitely is something for us to work towards, because this, is something that does affect children. So what age is the focus for a predeterminator of academic success, right? We talked about, we all, want our kids to succeed. Every parent wants their kid to be successful in the dunya and the akhirah, wants their kid to reach the highest success, be able to, achieve success financially, as well as, in their deen, inshallah. So what age determines that for academia is actually, like I said, by kindergarten, right? 85% of the brain has been fully developed by age 3. So by that time, you should have been already, increasingly exposing them to words and to language and to books. Young children whose parents read to them enter kindergarten having heard about 1.4 million words. During grades 2 to 8, students who have a firm foundation from K through first will continue to achieve higher results. Just based on those 2 grades, will continue to achieve those high results and continue to grow. The most powerful preschool avenue, like I said, when you build that strong basis, by 5th grade, they have developed a higher academic success, is reading. And students who start behind when they are kindergarten are statistically the largest point of school dropouts by high school as well. So, the foundation really, really in that preschool time up to kindergarten, you want to be exposing them to as much books as possible. And then hopefully as they continue to read, that will build those pathways that will allow them to continue to grow and be educated. Causes of illiteracy, right? We talked a little bit about COVID, but also poverty. Unfortunately, students who don't have the financial resources, as well as parents who are overstressed. Unfortunately, poverty is an intergenerational issue. So parents who don't have that time and privilege to be able to sit with their kids, it's gonna, affect the children, and they'll lose those reading skills over summer break as well, due to the lack of books in their home, due to lack of parents at home to take them to the library, to try to encourage them to read. They're gonna be losing almost, all their skills that they learned over the past year. And so it's gonna be even harder when they enter in the fall. Intergenerational. So parents who have less than a high school diploma and live in income settings affects access to books. But I will say there is a study, and I will be mentioning it later on in this PowerPoint, about what is more important than parents being educated. So if you feel like maybe you haven't, had education, but you're very passionate, you want your kids to, all hope is not lost. There's something even more important than parent education. Although it does affect things, it isn't the end of the line. Access to books, right? Unfortunately, again, poverty really affects access to books in the home. But, I would argue that, living in the West, it gives us great privilege in having, so many libraries available for us. So, the hope is that we take advantage of those libraries. No encouragement, right? We talked about, financial stress and work insecurity, immigration. Unfortunately, a lot of times when you immigrate from another country, you can really struggle with the language yourself. And that might cause a little bit of struggle to get your kid to learn that language. And so there is this kind of effect, because when you are unable to read that language to your kid, that could affect things. Although honestly, being a child of immigrants myself and an immigrant myself, my parents actually really, really stressed education really strongly. So it's not necessarily, again, not an end of the line thing. There's just different avenues, which I will talk later, that will help your child to learn to read, to help with pronunciation. And there are so many resources that are available to us. So it's very important to kind of, continue to pursue that, even despite any roadblocks. And technology. So most of today's schoolwork obviously requires online resources, computers, Wi-Fi. And, without that at home, it's been difficult. Although nowadays it seems like schools offer Chromebooks. So hopefully that will help bridge the divide a little bit. Results of illiteracy. We talked a little bit, college education, high paying job, less health even, being less educated, like, it correlates directly with crime, with drugs, unfortunately, education really does help with protecting children from, having a bad path in life, incarceration, and also state dependency. So the studies is a majority of people who are, like need that welfare from the government and food stamps actually, have poor literacy levels. What is the biggest determiner of child literacy in a home? So remember how we were talking about a little bit about immigration? Well, the surprising study is that the importance of a home library, that is more important than anything else. Having a home library is more important than college educated parents. Exposure to books, just having the books in the home. And social science research did a study where if you have over 80 books in the home, even if a parent is college educated or not college educated, or the parent is, like no matter what the parent's, education is, having a home library is more important than that, and actually boosted education of the child beyond anything else. And teenagers who came from a home filled with books were as literate, numerate, and technology apt in adulthood as university graduates who grew up with only a few books. So even studying from those like similar, kids, a similar age, can see the importance of books beyond even a university degree. And who university graduates who had no book in the home had similar literacy levels who stopped their schooling at ages 13, 14. Like I said, Harvard had said, like some of these university students are not even able to read a full book. So, exposure to books has been shown to help with literacy, with numeracy, which is math, and also technology, right? So all those things that we kind of really feel are important for our kids to learn, all of those literally are helped by just having books in the home. And my personal belief, as somebody who has a lot of books, who tries to expose my children to books in every part of our home, is the reason that is the case, I think, is the more books you have, the more likelihood a child is to pick them up, to find something that they like, to sift through them, and just be exposed to this idea of reading. And it will help them with, even without prodding from parents, it'll help them when they're bored, when they don't have anything to do, to be curious about what it's like to be a book reader. And that will help them with developing that love of reading. So the presence of books, like I said, numeracy, technology, and the boost in particular was found with the presence of printed books, which is why my belief is that it is having the book accessible to children. And probably when parents take away their devices and they're left with nothing to do, then they will probably learn to reach for that book because there's nothing else for them to do, especially as they age and maybe they're not, doing free play or playing with toys anymore. They will be, I have seen this with my own children. They will pick up a book, even if without my prodding, especially this summer break. And I will come downstairs or be in the kitchen, come around them, and I'll see them reading without me even telling them. So the presence of books is very important. It builds those pathways, even subconsciously. What type of books should kids be reading? So this is a question that I was asked as a teacher a lot, because I think there is this misconception kind of that kids should not read younger than their level, or about graphic novels, audiobooks. So, I just really think it's important to realize that all types of books are reading. Of course, we want our kids, I'm a parent and an educator, I understand. We want our kids to be able to read those really thick, 800-page books and be as educated as possible and be able to get into college and learn and not feel daunted by words. But I think it's okay to begin with encouraging our kids, like I said, to develop a love of reading. And to do that, we have different readers. I have different readers. I have my oldest, he's very big a fan of fantasy. So I try to make sure to get him, books that are, very fast paced, have a lot of adventure. And he really likes adventure and mystery. Those books, they're very thick, so he can handle a lot of words. And I've noticed that has really helped him with his education. Now, my middle schooler, on the other hand, words are daunting for her. She, open a book. If the font is small, will immediately feel not an interest to read. She was really into graphic novels for a very long time, and until now really loves them. And I would wonder, is she ever going to read anything beyond graphic novels, and is reading, and there are studies that show graphic novels are great because, again, they build that pathway in the brain of achieving pleasure through reading. And they help kids develop a love of opening books themselves. And so, alhamdulillah, I'm happy to report that she is starting now to delve into middle grade, to start to read those longer books, to read even books with, more words on the page. And it is slow going with her, but, I've tried to see if, hopefully verse novels, like Getting Between is in verse, that really helps because the words are, let me grab Getting, so I can show you guys. I should have grabbed it before. But with Getting Between, when you have so much space on the page, this can help students feel less daunted. So you want to really explore different books. In verse, graphic novels can be a bridge, verse novels can be a bridge, and then you can move on to younger MG and then older MG. So you really want to try as much as possible to encourage them to read in their interest. She's really into books about survival, which is actually, funnily enough, the topic of my next novel and verse, inshallah. So you really want to kind of encourage the reluctant readers. Another thing I've really, really found myself an interest in recently, and I found that especially when I taught middle school, I taught middle school at an Islamic school, and I had a lot of ESL students, English as a second language, who would come from other countries, and their parents had put them in to try to learn English, and they struggled with it. And their parents, a lot of them didn't know English either. Audiobooks were wonderful. I would give these kids audiobooks along with the print book because I wanted them to both see the word and hear it. And I would tell them, even with students who have attention deficit disorder, right, ADHD, it is very difficult for them to focus. So a lot of them would open the book, and as they read along and heard the audiobook, they would be able to follow along, and it would help them with that focus, help them with pronunciation, and help them with be able to listen as well as learn the words. And it really provided a pathway for them to be able to understand books, because the most frustrating thing for kids, I think, is to not understand what they're reading and to be told that they should be reading, but to not enjoy it at all. So you really want to try different aspects, even with Amina Banana, my book, Amina Banana, the chapter book series, I've had a lot of students that have told me that they love the fact that there's illustrations in the book. So you have short chapters, you have a short book, you have illustrations. Chapter books are great for this. They start to introduce them to reading for fun. And you really want to try as much as possible to have them keep trying different genres, see what they like. Some middle grades even have illustrations and are still thicker. Try verse, try audiobooks, try graphic novels until, inshallah, they develop that love of reading, and you'll see them as they advance in age start to pick out those longer books and start to be able to tolerate more and more words. How many minutes a day should kids read? Another question I was asked as an educator, because it feels like sometimes like you want your kid to be reading and you're like, how much is enough? But then there's only so many hours of the day, but also kids might be resistant. So giving that like kind of exact time really has helped me, because sometimes my kids will be like not wanting to read, and I'll tell them, okay, let's set a timer for this many minutes and you have to be reading during this time. And so it'll help them because they know that, okay, they have this time. So they get lost in that book in the moment. And when they're done, sometimes even the timer would go off and they'd keep reading, but at least it would provide them with the framework. And I tell them after this amount of minutes, you're free to do whatever you want. And so that would give them, structure. And so they'd be more willing to read. So I think it's very important to provide an exact minutes. And studies show that it's actually 20 minutes a day. So it's not even that long. 20 minutes a day. Students who read 20 minutes a day, every single day, scored in the 90th percentile on standardized tests. Like studies show, even with school, if schools are providing 20 minutes of independent reading time, those students at the end of the year did so much better on standardized tests, just reading. And if you reach your child 20 minutes a day starting in kindergarten, you will also have had them hear 1.8 million more words. By sixth grade, your child will have read for 850 hours. So think about how much reading just 20 minutes will affect your child in terms of vocabulary, pronunciation. Like I said, if you struggle with the English language yourself, you could even put an audiobook and listen together, or have them listen to an audiobook next to you. And audiobooks are so accessible nowadays. I mean, they are on, there's Amazon, there's Bookshop, there's Barnes and Noble, they're on, even YouTube sometimes for certain books. So you can really, try to, as much as possible, try to get them to, find the best way. But 20 minutes a day is honestly the best goal, and not even that much. I think kids even can understand like 20 minutes is, only a third of an hour. It's not that long. Once they get it over with, then they can, go and play, or, do whatever they want to do. And it really offers that goal for them to achieve and feel like they are succeeding as well, which is really important because you want kids to feel empowered. So when you give them that goal and they achieve it, they feel happy, they feel satisfied. And then after 20 minutes, they finish a book, feel that, dopamine hit of being able to finish a book. And that will also build that pathway of a love of reading. The importance of diverse books. So diverse books are very important, right? They like reflect back the experience. They become, like, for us, Muslim books, right? Being Muslim, reading your experience. I was an adult when I first read a Muslim book, and honestly, it changed the whole way of my trajectory of my life, because I had always loved reading and I had always loved writing, but I never took the step to be a published writer until I saw Muslim books on the shelf. When I saw other writers like Huda Fahmy, like S.K. Ali, so many different books on the shelf, I was encouraged to pursue my passion of writing as well. And so now I write for a living, alhamdulillah. So, reading your own identity is so important, seeing yourself, and it empowers you. Because, when you read about a child who is going to Salat al-Jum'ah, or like getting between, who is praying in between his middle school days, who is going to the masjid for Saturday school like Amina does, you feel like this is so normal, right? They wear hijab and they read, Quran, and they pray. Then as a Muslim, you're empowered because you're like feeling like this is a normal thing, nothing different about it. So then when you are yourself experiencing, when you're going to school or when you're society, you're more empowered to be proud of your identity. Windows as well. So understanding different cultures. I tried to get Black Muslim literature. Jamila Tompkins Bigelow is wonderful for this. I love her literature, and she provides such great positive Black Muslim identity. This is so important because, unfortunately, even within our own societies, we have colorism, we have racism. So it's so important to explore different races, different cultures, introduce kids and out of their bubble so they can have empathy and kindness, which is what the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to do. And it also affirms, like I said, belonging, social justice, right? You want your kids to also, understand, right? Like Palestine has been such an important topic, and alhamdulillah, so many more Palestinian books are being published, that this is a way to, one of my personal favorite books was a self-published book called Zayn and Nima, Stand Up for Palestine. And when I read it to my kids, it provided a pathway for them to understand how important it is, to do amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. This is an important part of Islam. And so, teaching them to stand up for the right thing is very, very important, and building empathy. What current struggles do you face with having your kids read, and what strategies can you use to overcome them? I'll go a little bit into that. We can, if you have questions, or we'll go a little bit into that and the questions that Noorart provided for me. But, what you can do as parents, as educators, read to your children, especially before age 3. I think before kids get into school, I think the reason that studies stress so much the ages before kindergarten is because, unfortunately, when kids are young, you might think that, they might not need to be read to because they're not in school yet, but it's actually the most beneficial activity. So reading to your child before that age is so important. Have a home library. Remember, having almost 80 books in the home was even more important than a parent's education. Take your kids to the public library. My kids beg me to go to the library. And when we go, honestly, I don't even push them to read. Sometimes they'll pick up books. Sometimes they'll be in the little toy area, and I'll just be sitting on the side watching them. But just exposing them to that culture of going to the library, we'll have them, see those books, view it as a pleasurable activity, encourage them to view books. And sometimes my 7-year-old, the last time we went, she saw a series she loved and picked it up and brought it to me, even though she had never picked up a book before in the library. She had always been doing the Legos or the kitchen set or the train sets there. And she picked up a book and started reading it. And ever since then, she's been really obsessed with that series. So, you never know what will spark their interest. Don't make it a punishment. I know we want our kids to read, and kids are going to be resistant, especially if it's something they're not used to. But if you tell your child, I'm going to take away your device and you're never allowed, you have to read, or I'm going to take away your tablet forever, or, you have to read because, you're not doing well at school and this is your punishment or this and that, they're going to view this as a chore. They're never going to use it as a reward. They're never going to view it as something they enjoy. So you really want to approach it more from a different place. So something I do personally that in my house that I've found the biggest success in, because honestly, during the day and even after school, we're busy. They come home from school, we get them, sometimes we have after school activities, sometimes we have sports, sometimes we have put on school. And there's so much time that also I don't want to overwhelm them. There's homework. So what I've really realized is the best time for kids to read is before bed. So I don't allow any devices before bedtime. I don't allow any sort of, technology upstairs. I have them have books. And before bed, we come in, we read the Athkar, Quran together, pray Isha, sit together. For my younger two, I read to them. But for my middle schooler and high schooler, they're not interested in the same things that I'm reading to the younger ones. And alhamdulillah, I've read to them in the past. So they kind of have that reading love now, alhamdulillah. So they have little lights in their bedrooms, lamps by their bedside. And, I will tell them, you can read as long as you want before you get tired. One of my children struggles to fall asleep. So I tell her, read as long as you want. And she'll, reading has become a relaxing activity, something to unwind from the day, something to, enjoy and look forward to. Sometimes that book that they're reading before bedtime in the morning at breakfast, I'll see them bring it down and I'll be like, what's going on? And they'll tell me, we want to take this and read it at recess because we stopped at a cliffhanger and we really want to know what happens. And she'll take it to school or he'll take it to school with him. So, that has been one of the most honestly best things. And it really provides it as a reward because they're using it to relax before bedtime. So it helps the brain view it as something pleasurable. And also, I don't time them before bedtime, but it usually turns out to be 20 minutes, honestly, because they have that book in front of them. They're in bed before they're tired. So they have that time and, it's like, there's nothing else to do. So they're reading and using it to relax and let them read what they like. Sometimes it's graphic novels, sometimes it's fantasy, sometimes it's contemporary, sometimes it's Muslim fiction, sometimes it's just, a chapter book. Sometimes even my 11-year-old picks up picture books and I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Rereading, that's completely fine too. Spend time reading together, sometimes my 7-year-old who is learning to read still, she's in her chapter book stage, she doesn't want to read. So she'll tell me, can you read this chapter? And I'll tell her, sure, I'll read one chapter, you read one chapter, or I'll read one page, you read one page. So it's the game popcorn. So you kind of, or, you have all of you together as a family. Each person calls on the next person who's going to read. I used to play this game with my middle school students as well. And one student would finish and then be like popcorn and call on another student. And it used to make it a little bit more interactive. Listen to audiobooks on car rides. There's so many benefits to listening to audiobooks as a family. And instead of, having on, something that's not beneficial, you could read audiobooks together, read diverse books, seek Muslim fiction. It'll help kids feel like they're interested because these characters might reflect themselves. And, like I said, bedtime. Also, the support of Muslim authors. So, as a Muslim author myself, it is not an easy thing to write Muslim fiction, especially in a mainstream industry that, values profit above anything. I mean, corporations and publishing value profit. And being a Muslim author who, has a hijabi on the cover, instantly when, kids see this, when they're non-Muslim, they're probably not going to gravitate towards it unless their parents actively encourage them. And obviously with racism and with being, Muslim, you're going to face a vast majority of the audience that are probably not going to pick up the book, on their own. So, being Muslim readers, I try to stress the importance of trying to support Muslim authors. You know, our books are banned for Islamic content sometimes. School and librarian educators are being actively discouraged not to stock books. Muslim authors who've stood up for Palestine are being disinvited from schools, are being not even approached for school visits because, are being told, sometimes some of my Muslim friends have been told, don't mention Palestine because of the, kind of culture, unfortunately, around this issue. And sometimes it's just not even something that you can see, but just something that sales will show, that sales of Muslim books just don't do as well. So, that's why it's so important. And I try to stress, like, Muslim bookstores like Noorart and Muslim booksellers, Muslim readers, you all hold the key to seeing more Muslim books on the shelf. So when you order our books, when you do pre-orders, this will affect how our publishers themselves, if they see more pre-orders, they will put more effort into marketing a book. They will also pick up more books by me in the future, and say, okay, this author has a good base, and will, pre-order. We'll see that support, and will offer me more book deals to hopefully publish more. And alhamdulillah, Amina Banana, my first contract was for 4 books, 2 of which are out now, 2 of which are coming out next year. And then I was just offered, alhamdulillah, a deal to make 2 more. So 6 in the series. And, for a book that is about a proud Muslim girl with a hijabi on the cover, I mean, alhamdulillah, it's a true dream come true. So I couldn't do that without, Muslim reader support. I take it very seriously as a Muslim author to write with amana, to write with a knowledge that my books are reflections and, for Muslim parents, that they can trust what they're reading and that they can trust what their kids are picking up. So I take that very seriously. And I hope in return that the Muslim community will support me and continue to, check out my books at the library, to stock the books in Islamic schools, to teach our books as novel studies, to pick up the next books in pre-order. So Jazakallah khair for continuing to support. And inshallah, we will continue to produce books for you. Muslim reviewers and halal books. So this is something I also, recognize as being very important because I also care so much, right? We want our kids to be proud of their Islam, but we also are concerned with haram content. And not all books, even ones labeled as Muslim, have halal content. That is the reality, we've picked up books that, I picked up books. I was a reviewer before. I did stop reviewing because unfortunately, writing has taken up so much of my time that I'm unable to do that. But, books, not all of them are suitable for the young Muslim reader. So, and each parent also has guidelines that what they want their kids to read. And that changes by age as well, right? So I completely recognize this. That's why, I really strongly recommend following Muslim book reviewers, and particularly Islamic School Librarian. If you guys go to her website, IslamicSchoolLibrarian.com, you actually can search a book. And if you type it into her website, she does the most. Honestly, I don't think anyone else has reviewed as many Muslim books as she has. And you can type it. And she is somebody who flags every single type of content. And if you go to the end of the book review, at the end of it, you will see the flags and you'll decide if that book is right for you or not. So definitely Islamic School Librarian has so many, decide for your family if that book works for you. Maybe this doesn't. She also cares a lot about quality of writing, which is something I personally think is very important. And when I answer the Noorart questions, I'll delve into why I think writing quality is so important. There's also a website that recently I saw called Mindful Muslim Reader. They review, it seems like, a variety of books, not just Muslim. And I think it's very important too, because, our kids are, especially if they're avid readers, they're not just going to be reading Muslim books. They're going to be reading outside. And in fact, I encourage kids to read outside their own experiences because you want them to be exposed to the world and know what's out there. And they flag every single type of content as well. So you can decide what works for you and your family. And they'll tell you which books, just promote general Muslim, which are general human good values, right? And which kind of may not. So also we talked about, bookstores and book fairs, many Muslim bookstores really care about Islamic values, and so you can really trust what they offer you, inshallah. Thank you for listening. You can find me at my Instagram at Shifa Saltagi Safadi, where I do offer school visits. I offer like bookmarks, stickers, updates. So if you follow me, you can, inshallah, get those, kind of updates at what I'm doing, what new books are coming out. And I'm always trying to hopefully, inshallah, try to make as much benefit for our communities. So I am going to look at the questions and see if there are any questions, if you guys want to drop any, but I'm also going to answer the questions that Noorart did provide for me. And in
Sure.
the meantime,
Uh, Sister Shifa,
yes,
if I may step
yes,
in, and because
yes, of
I could,
course.
Jazakumullah khair. I do have, if you'd like, I can, like normally with our, guests, I could moderate the questions for you, make it easier for you,
Yes,
inshallah. Barakallah fikum.
absolutely. Please.
And I do have a question that's rather personal. For example, my eldest is interested in reading novels, but it seems it's becoming more difficult to guide him on what books to read. So he tends to stick or love to buy the mainstream. Uh,
Mhm,
you know, so for example, he loves the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, for
mhm,
example, and
mhm,
as you know, it does reflect a lot of things, but it doesn't, it does have some content that's not really appropriate. So how would you so it's easier to handle, when they're younger, you can guide them
mhm.
easily, they listen to you, etc. But from your experience, if you could share that, how would you guide, as they get into the teenage years, please?
Absolutely. I do have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, so I'm very familiar with this. And I grew up in America with no Muslim books to read, right? So, and I was an avid reader. So I'm going to be fully and completely honest with you. And of course, it comes back to what each parent wants. So number one, what you said about your child is not a unique thing, honestly. So many students prefer, so many kids prefer mainstream books to Muslim books. There's a reason for that. Unfortunately, I have noticed this as an author that, there are Muslim books that are published that may not have the highest writing quality. Now, again, I don't want to seem mean about this or, in any way trying to discourage people from buying Muslim books, but my own children have, opened a Muslim book before and said, this is boring or this is preachy, right? Something that is very common with kids is that they don't want to read a book and feel like they're reading nonfiction. Unfortunately, it's just, as much as we want them to, just read like, Sahaba stories or Prophet stories or just straight up stories, I think like, the way, even subhanAllah, if you look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, or even the Quran, I was talking with my husband about, the story of Yusuf, alayhi salam, Prophet Yusuf, and how it's told in the Quran, in the Surah Yusuf, in such a storyteller way. And even as adults, we gravitate towards storytelling. We gravitate towards action and intrigue and emotional, kind of connection, and for me, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, his stories, the way he experiences emotion, the way he shows emotion, the way he shows fear before every time, I get nervous every time I do a webinar, I say his words of Allahumma shrah li sadri. These that you connect on a personal level with characters, right? We connect on a personal level in a book. And if you don't have good storytelling, and of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Quran and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is divine. So, no one is even comparing books to the Quran. But, with quality, as humans, we are going to gravitate towards fun stories. We're going to gravitate towards stories we connect to. We're going to gravitate stories we are entertained by. So it is a very difficult thing to hand kids books that maybe are literally a strict lesson from start to finish with no mistakes or drama or emotion and expect them to want to read that. They're going to get bored or they're going to feel like they're learning a lesson and you're going to find that they're not that interested. And as they're younger, when they're younger, they don't have that much problem. You're right. But as they get older, you're going to find that they're going to prefer the mainstream books because those mainstream books maybe provide entertainment. So, one of the things that I've tried to do that and combat that is I have really, really, really stressed the importance, which is why I really like Islamic School Librarian, because she stresses the quality of not only the Islamic fiction, but also the writing quality. And I've really taken so many courses to try with my own writing as well to try to make it as entertaining as possible, to try to insert things that kids will like, to try to make it funny, to have funny things, to put Islam and fold it in a way that is natural, that teaches them about dua, about salah, about the prophets in a gentle way, that they are incorporating it without feeling like someone is lecturing them and preaching at them, that they are incorporating it in a natural way. But also, if your kid also just, even with that, even with like you hand them writing Muslim fiction that is high quality, but maybe there's not that much, which there really isn't that much, and they gravitate towards the mainstream, I honestly will tell you, like, I really, really think it's important to have kids love reading. And I understand concerns about content. I do. But as an avid reader myself, when I grew up, there were no Muslim books. I was reading all sorts of books, Harry Potter, Nancy Drew series, which, like even like, classics, like all these things had, things that were not Islamic, girlfriend, boyfriends, things that we know were, are just not like completely halal content, even like, kids that yell at parents, obviously, all these different things like lying, this and that. I honestly don't remember ever thinking to myself, I want to do what these characters are doing, because I understood it as being characters that were not Muslim. So I don't think that reading about non-Muslim, like I ever thought to myself, I'm going to do what they're doing. I viewed it more as entertainment. And also I think like, you want to also offer kids trust, right? So something I've really tried to do with my older kids is tell them, listen, I honestly, I'm a writer, I'm a mom, and I also don't have the time to read every single book they're going to read, to screen every single book they're going to read. I try to do that with my younger two as much as possible, but it's easier. The books are shorter, but once they get into ages 11, once they get into middle grade and YA, it's physically impossible to follow along with every single book, especially mainstream books. You just don't know. So I've tried to really focus on the foundation. We teach them what's halal. We taught them what's haram. We model it in our own behavior as Muslim parents. We have told them, but then we have to put the reins in their hands once they reach that age, especially puberty. I mean, Islamically at puberty, they are the ones that are deciding that they must choose Islam for themselves, right? They are like considered completely Muslim, like, beings at that point by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have a hisab. So at that point, whether it's books or even whether it's media, whether it's going to school, whether it's going, we can't completely and utterly monitor every single thing our kids are doing. So with books and with anything else, I try to tell my kids, listen, I'm allowing you to go to the library and pick up what you want. I'm allowing you to, pick up Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is one of my kids' favorite series as well. And I'm allowing you to even, choose the books that I may not have read. Fantasy, I can't keep up. He reads so much, higher, but I've told them, you know what halal and haram is. And you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching, and we are held accountable for what our ears hear, for what our eyes see. There's a hadith about that. So I want you to be your own accountable for your own self. And I tell them, if you feel your heart, they have a fitrah, they do. And I tell them, if your heart tells you that something feels wrong, come and show me and ask me. If your heart tells you that you don't want to continue this book because you feel uncomfortable, it's okay. Even if I've purchased that book and you feel like it's wasting my money, drop that book. You don't have to continue to read it. If you feel like you're just reading it out of entertainment and you are completely knowledgeable that this book, what is happening is just that somebody else's lives, and obviously it's going to be wild and ridiculous and out there because of the way fiction is, because fiction is an escape. It's a story that, an author has pushed to limits to try to entertain. And usually fiction books do come with a moral at the end. Even Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which they do the most ridiculous things, they do. But at the end of the books, they always have sort of a moral of brotherhood or friendship, and kind of, try to like bring it to something like that in the end is sort of a little bit positive without being too preachy. So there are even themes in that mainstream fiction that, even fantasy, right? Often, things like, are like Harry Potter. When I read it as a kid, I remember, thinking about, how, good should beat evil, right? Like there even these small things which they might not be so in your face or spelled out for the reader, but kids are smart. They understand these concepts. You tell that your kid, and it's haram, and as they grow older, they're going to have to make that decision themselves. And I've actually found a lot of success in empowering kids, because when that happens, then they themselves feel that trust and they won't want to break that trust, and they feel that responsibility, and they'll surprise you. Especially when you raise them in that environment where you care about them and where you trust them and where you have taught them Islam and where they know what halal and haram is, they will choose, inshallah, and I'm making dua all the time and asking Allah to protect them, but inshallah, they will choose to do the right thing, and they will themselves start to recognize what they're comfortable with and what they're uncomfortable with.
Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum. Sister Shifa, we do have another question which talks about the same, the point that you just made, that it's so hard to find good, clean books, especially for 12 and 14 years old. You mentioned the website IslamicSchoolLibrarian.com. Is
Mm-hmm.
that the correct one?
Yes,
Oh,
IslamicSchoolLibrarian.com. She
oh,
has Muslim, so for her, it's Muslim books, right? So you can search any Muslim books. There's also Mindful Muslim Reader, I
mm-hmm.
believe. They do other books. But like I said, I mean, once your children get to 12 and 14 years old, um, unfortunately, even for these websites, they're being unpaid work. They're usually people that are reading these books out of a passion for literature and a passion for our ummah. So you might not find every single book. And I don't like to discourage kids from reading, because you want kids to, like, especially avid readers, you want them to read. So, even if you don't find that book on a website or the other, I really, really encourage you to empower your children, to talk to them about what is out there and tell them, what is halal and haram, and try to empower them to be on that journey with you, where they will be open with you and tell you what's in there. And even if they're reading something that you haven't read, they will their self they will do it with intention and with wara, inshallah.
Barakallah fikum. Thank you so much.
Allah.
If you would allow me, we could start with
Mhm.
some of the questions that we would like to address, inshallah.
Um,
If you could share with us a moment or a story where a young reader was deeply impacted by one of your own books. Jazakumullah khair.
Absolutely. There's a lot of emails I've gotten, subhanAllah, from kids. Um, I know, like, so many students I mentioned earlier have come up to me. I've had a kid who came up to me, and she told me she's Syrian American, and she told me, I never thought about, and she was like 10 years old, and I've never thought about, what it means to be Syrian and what it means to be American. And these aren't things I thought about, but now I know I can be proud of who I am. And I know that if I face, because Kareem, he does the wrong decision, right? He does homework for somebody else and tries to be cool and tries to fit in with the crowd that is kind of telling him, being Syrian is weird. So she told me, I realized that that's not what I should be doing. That it's empowered her to be more proud of her identity. And I've had children who reached out to me to tell me, what's going to happen next with Kareem? Does he make the football team? What's it, and alhamdulillah, even yesterday I was at a wedding, and a child came up to me, and they were reading Amina Banana, and they were so shocked that I was the author. And they were telling me, wow, like, she wears hijab and she's young, and it's like empowered her to be proud of her own Islamic identity and be encouraged to wear hijab and be proud of it. So, alhamdulillah, these messages have really inspired me to continue to hopefully write fiction for our children that will continue to empower them. Even it might be in subtle ways, like just, going to the library and pray your salah and not miss it, but just be proud of who you are, and that change within, inshallah, will be beneficial to our ummah.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I do have another question here. From your experience, what elements make a book unputdownable for a Muslim child or teen? So making it something that he would not want to leave until he finishes, for example.
Absolutely. So this is what comes down to quality, right? I touched a little bit about this earlier, but for authors, it's called craft. And to learn craft, there's a very much like writing, I think, subhanAllah, from the outside, it might seem like writing is just you open your computer, you write words on the page, and then they come out in a book. I can tell you that that is not the case. And even I think when I talk to students and I talk to them about writing and empower them to write their own stories, they really like to know this, that authors really struggle. My drafts, we call it drafts when it's the first time. So I'll show you a draft of a picture book that I have right here, and I've printed it out. And the reason I printed it out is because I usually will take a pen and I'll mark it up and I'll cancel things, I'll write things, and I'll go through it and try to, and this is a picture book, so there's only like 10 pages right here, but my middle grade novels, let me grab you so you can see what it looks like, but I also put them out, and this, my kids have decorated it, but it looks like this, and I will write it and then I'll print it out and I'll go through with a pen, and with my pen, I will sometimes have to completely rewrite whole sections. I will sometimes have to completely cancel things out. I will realize things that are going on. And that's all self-editing before my editor has even reached it. And with my second novel in verse, so Kareem Between is my first novel in verse, but my second one is called Sisters Alone, and I'm currently working on it. I have a contract with my publisher, and it comes out next year, inshallah, in September of 2026. So inshallah, a whole year from now. And right now I'm working on the last round of edits before we turn it into my editor to do copy edits. Copy edits is the grammar. So subhanAllah, when people hear editing, they assume that it's grammar, but grammar is just called copy editing, and it's the last step before the book goes into book format in a PDF file. And before that, I've been through 3 rounds of developmental edits on Sisters Alone. And for the first 2 rounds, I completely rewrote the book from start to finish. 300 pages, complete rewrite, both times. So, sometimes when, like it seems like these books, they're just written like that and they came from the author, but that is not the case. And the reason that I rewrote those books is the first time I had to rewrite it due to plot. And plot is basically the steps of the story, the scenes of the story. And the second time I rewrote it because it's a 2-sister POV, and each sister, I had to go in and decide who their characters were, and I hadn't been doing well with that. So I had to really delve into craft and delve into writing. And, this is what makes a book unputdownable, honestly. It's the science of craft. Because when you craft a book as an author, I'm really paying attention to write this book as high quality as possible, to have a character who the reader feels like they can root for, to have a character who has flaws that are not completely, I don't like to write characters that are so haram, I want my characters to be halal for Muslim readers, but they also have to have mistakes, because readers like to root for characters that have mistakes, because when they're shocked, that reader will be like, oh my gosh, I want to know what happens, right? You find characters, in my second Amina Banana, it's called The Formula for Winning. The character, she wants to win a spelling bee. And so when I was reading it with my daughter, she was telling me, is she going to win the spelling bee? And I would tell her, well, you have to read to find out. And so you see that character study to try to read that spelling bee, to try to win that spelling bee. So, you know, that is plot. And then the character arcs will show you this character changing. And you want that change to be throughout. That's what hooks a reader. Because I myself, as an adult that reads, and I have so many books that I read to try to learn craft, because the best way you learn craft is through reading. But if a book is boring, until now, I will find myself unable to finish it. I will put it away. I can't force myself. You know, no one has time for a boring story. So unputdownable stories really, really come down to plot, to character arc, to human emotion, to all these things that it takes a lot of time. Sisters Alone, I've been working on it for 3 years. Getting Between, I worked on it for 3 years. I Mean a Banana, each book took me about like, you know, 6 months to a year to write and draft and then revise, and then 2 years for it to get into the publishing pipeline. So many people at my publishing house will look at this book, will come back and send me notes. Is this right? I even have my Arabi, which I'm fluent in Arabi, but my copy editors will send me, you know, double check this Arabi because we went on Google and it wasn't right. And I will tell them, well, this is Syrian Arabic and what you're reading is Egyptian Arabic or something like that, you know, subhanAllah. So all these things and all these factors, they go into making a book the best quality possible. And so all these things, the end goal is to make a book unputdownable. And you know, subhanAllah, every kid is different. So what my 11-year-old finds unputdownable is different than what my 14-year-old finds unputdownable, is different than what my 7-year-old finds unputdownable. But you want to just kind of try to have kids explore what they love and have them try to, you know, find the books that they will interest them. And it will come down, for me at least as an adult, it comes down to craft. The writing quality of the book is really, which is why I really love Islamic School Librarian, because she really cares about craft and notices craft. And she actually read a craft book to be able to recognize craft. She's actually a dear friend of mine, but she read a craft book to recognize craft, to be able to recommend books based on quality. So she did all the work for parents and readers out there.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much.
وإياكم.
Ms. Shifa, I do have a question that just popped to my head, and it's the use of AI, ChatGPT, with school homework. All our children are experience this, and I would love to get your take on this. Should we encourage it? Should we try to minimize it? And what do you think? The benefits, the drawbacks? Jazakumullah kul khair.
Absolutely. So, you know, AI has definitely been something that's making its way into schools. When I was teaching, and that was like a few years ago, I had an essay 100%. It was written by ChatGPT. I could tell immediately. It's very, very clear, and it has become a big, big topic in our world. My take on this is that it's very harmful, honestly. And there's a variety of reasons AI is harmful, but you know, I think that as much I have not allowed my children to use AI, and I hope that they continue to be convinced, because they're convinced now that it's harmful, and I hope that as they grow, they don't use it. But there are so many studies about the harms of AI. I mean, number one, AI is very bad for the climate. So every question you ask AI to answer for you, it's destroying water in the world, and it's destroying, you know, it's taking so much water from communities, and it's just destroying the climate. Not to mention feeding billionaires that really do not care about our world. But honestly, the main thing is it's destroying brains. It's destroying human brains. There was a recent study that showed, and they said that people who use AI, even for only a few months, their cognitive like decline was at like a 60% rate or something. And, you know, don't quote me on this. I would really, you know, urge you to seek out that article yourself to see the exact quote. But there was, just by leaning on AI to start answering emails, to start doing all these different functions, unfortunately, that has caused people to lean on it. And what that has done is created people to not use their brains anymore. So if this is adults, I can't even imagine what it's doing to a developing mind that must learn critical thinking, that should be creating essays and work. So for children, I'm very against it. because I think as a teacher, I recognize that kids weren't able to formulate sentences because they were spending so much time, on social media or being fed, these like what to do and what to say, and so much that they like had not been allowed to creatively write, that I can't imagine that if we teach them to lean on AI, what that will do to their brains. I don't know that if they could develop in an adolescence just using AI, what that will do to them as an adult, if they could even gain that back, if they can even come back to being able to create critical thinking, that 100%, being a critical reader, it helps you in so many different ways, not just if you want to pursue writing, but also just as being a human being who understands the world. Because something that, like, for example, the issue of Palestine, when you open a news article for Palestine, you recognize something like the news article that talk about Palestinian death. Voice. So they'll always say, but they won't use the active voice, which, if you were to reframe it, would be Israeli, genocide has killed Palestinians, right? They will use passive voice. And what that will do is that will make the reader unconsciously not feel sympathy for Palestinians, not connect. And I mean, obviously, as Muslims, we are more connected to this issue. But the average reader that's reading this article is not going to realize that the difference between passive voice and active voice, and how that affects emotions, and how that affects the view of this, of the reader. So being a critical reader, being a smart reader, being able to write, I mean, these are things that our ummah should care about, because we need to be stronger. We need to be able to master language if we're going to change the world, if we're going to do dawah, if we're going to, defend our ummah, if we're going to make change in journalism, in media. We already know that we are such a disadvantage that, taking the easy way, 100% is only going to disadvantage our generations in the future. So 100% AI, I am against it. Not to mention, honestly, AI is theft. The writing of AI, the way AI works basically is you ask it a question, it searches the whole web, it tries to figure out the right answer, then brings you the summary. That's what AI does. So with writing, in terms of creative writing, it basically, you tell her or whatever, the chat GPT, you tell it, write me a story about blah, blah, blah. It will search all the books, steal the author work of authors that have, worked hard, and put you a book. And that's basically made up of a story just based on what it thinks it's writing. If you ask it a question, and this is dangerous, especially with fiqh questions. I mean, we know for a fact that, as people, when they Google Islam, they're not getting the right answer Islamically, even if you try your best. It's very different than when you ask your sheikh or Islamic scholar, and they have this wide breadth of knowledge of the deen and fiqh, and they're able to answer you based on the madahib, based on their wealth of knowledge, based on the deen, and so much nuances and context. Well, how do you imagine what Google AI or ChatGPT are doing when you ask them a question? They're giving you wrong answers just based on the web. Wikipedia at an extremely, extreme way that, that sometimes you get the right answers, but you're just doing yourself a disservice because you really don't know. I have myself at the Google AI that I just really do not like it. But when I type something into Google, I see at the top, the answers, and if they're not correct, I've researched, once I was researching what is the award for this, and it gave me the awards, and the awards hadn't even happened, right? And it gave me last year's awards, or it gave me the Newbery Award instead of some other award. So you really, really cannot trust AI. Not to mention, I think there was even a recent study of psychosis. People who are using AI are actually using it now emotionally, and they think that AI is their friend, and they're using it as a way to make friendships and to make relationships, and it's causing them to lose their mind. They're absolutely losing their mind. There's actual psychosis. I think we all recognize the dangers and the harms of devices. How can we not recognize the AI is just, an added thing? And so I don't want to say that I don't recognize that ChatGPT and AI are definitely going to make their way into things like, you know, businesses, or, definitely I think we're seeing that with posts, with Canva, with this and that. People are using them here and there. So they can be a tool, to, help with efficiency. Personally, I have never used, and I don't ever intend to use, because I find that, with writing, it's the humanity of it. It's my heart that goes into it, that I would never use it to write. And I can recognize it very easily. As a writer, when I read a book that's written by AI, immediately I know the writing quality is so bad. But also, I'm trying to encourage my own children. As a teacher, I would immediately fail any student that would use ChatGPT and tell them that they either rewrite it or it's a zero, because I can immediately tell. And I believe from my own friends, I know that even public schools have been flagging this, colleges. I mean, I think this is going to be something our society struggles with. We haven't yet set regulations. It is something relatively new, but you're going to start seeing the same type of thing, like about how social media has harmed our youth, how it's increased depression and anxiety. We're going to see that with ChatGPT, and we're going to have to be careful. So I would strongly encourage children and young people not to use it. Their brains are still developing. We want them to learn how to write. We want them to read critically. We want them to use their brains, even when it's hard. It's that hardness that develops the pathways in their brain. So we're doing them a disservice if we let them take the easy way out. And I'm very personally against it, to be honest, both as an educator and as a writer.
بارك الله فيكم. جزاكم الله كل خير. Sister
Yeah.
Shifa, if I may ask another question, when it comes to the classroom as a school, how can we foster the reading culture from your experience?
Building reading time into that time. And I would do novel studies, but my goal was always that I had to have the students read at least 4 books in the year. So every quarter, we'd focus on one book. And I knew from past experience that many students, if I gave them a book and I told them, take this home, read a chapter and come back, that would not happen. It would not happen. So what I did was I built reading time into the class period. And honestly, in my opinion, that is more important than lecturing for the full hour and a half. So I would do half an hour of writing time, half an hour of lecture time, and then I'd give them half an hour or 20 minutes where I would tell them to read. And like I said, I really noticed that, especially with my English as an additional language students, they were struggling. They would open the book, or ADHD students as well, right? They would stare at the wall. I would see them, or the book would just stay like this, open in front of them, and nothing would be moving. So one of the things I actively started to do is I bought a speaker for my computer. I would buy an audiobook myself and then put the I like to read ahead. I remember when I was young, I would always read ahead from the teacher, and I would tell them you can put your headphones on as long as you are reading. And I also had children with autism in my class, and they would have noise canceling headphones. Sometimes that would help them. And so I was like completely fine with that. And they would be reading ahead along by themselves. But I'd also offer a lot of the students that struggled with reading, listening to the audiobook, and they would have the paperback version of the book open, and I would get the paperback version for all the students. So this is something I also realized was a lot of students don't own books. And when they don't own books, that affects them viewing book as like pleasurable, right? So I would try and really aim to get these kids, and alhamdulillah, paperbacks are typically more affordable. And if you buy them bulk from the publisher, you can actually, get an ability to get those kids to own it. And maybe there are donors in your community that can help. But like, for example, Amina Banana, the paperback version is $6 US dollars. And if you get it from the publisher, you can get it at bulk, $3 a copy. And for Kareem Between, the paperback version comes out the end of this month. It is $10. And if you get it bulk, it's $5, right? So you can really try to get copies of books that will get kids to be excited that they own their own book. You can put audiobooks. Another thing you can do, which is something I realized that really affects students, And also I do is author visits. So reach out to authors. Authors have websites. My website is shifasaltagi.com, and you reach out, you contact them. If you bring them to your class and you have them meet the students, sometimes kids are so starstruck that they meet these authors that they're encouraged to read, that they feel like it's like a celebrity almost, and they will really be excited, and they'll be asking questions, and get them to read the book beforehand and prepare questions, do big projects. I have an educator guide on my website. Lots of authors do educator guides. Encourage students to write their own poems, encourage them to write their own, sort of do an own project, analyzing that literature, answering questions, engaging with the text. Try to do a variety of books. So, try to do a novel in verse, which is like, less strenuous for that age group. And, novel in verses are easier because they are like, different poems. So it gives that dopamine hit for students because, they'll read one poem and it'll end after one page, and it'll often have kind of imagery with the poem. So, with Getting Between, one of the things I've done is try to create imagery with the words. And so you can see like this last page is titled MVP, and it shows a trophy as an image for students. And students love that. They love to even try their own imagery poems. I've had students who have written gorgeous poems with the images of like flowers or sunlight, or their like a basketball or whatever their favorite sport is. So you want to kind of introduce that. As an author myself, I send bookmarks and stickers when teachers for free around the US. When teachers reach out to authors, see if they have swag, which they call it swag, bookmarks to send. Try to make it as much an interactive process as possible. And I think all these different ways of making it a novel study, making books more interactive, including them, instead of just telling them, hey, go home and read 20 minutes today, bring the reader in, and that will undoubtedly stick with them. I still remember being like in fourth grade, and my teacher would read aloud The Cricket in Times Square every day to us. And I remember going home and, being so excited to come the next day to school and listen to the next chapter of this book. So, read alouds, doing all these different things. All these will really foster the love of reading, and it will stick with kids even beyond that book. It will stick with them for the future, inshallah.
So let's end on the last question, if I may.
Mhm.
You did touch on this point a bit, but if you could elaborate a bit more, when it comes to competing between book reading and the media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, it's like it's how can we make books more enticing? How can we make them make our children gravitate more towards them? And subhanallah, it's because their colleagues are all within that
Yeah.
environment where look at this, look at that, and everybody's connected to these devices. If you could share with us some pointers, barakallah fikum.
Absolutely. 100%. It is so hard to compete. Even myself as a parent, I see this. My kids, which would much rather watch a movie than read a book. I mean, it's very hard to compete for sure. I think, you really want to kind of figure out what they love. So my 11-year-old, she loves survival stories, stories where, like Hatchet by Gary Paulson, stories where, danger happens. My son, he likes fantasy. I've noticed, mystery is very popular. So you want to try to pick books that are exciting, that will sort of have high writing quality as well, to try to entice kids. Try to get the kids themselves to pick their own books that they will enjoy. Try to offer them incentives too. So something I tried this summer with my kids is telling them, okay, listen, I know you would rather, go out and play, or you'd rather just put a movie on. And I mean, it's hard to compete with that. But you know what? If you read 20 minutes a day, I'll give you 20 extra minutes of watching TV. If you read, you know, if you kind of like read and finish this book, I'll take you to, the local, store and buy you something you want. I'll get you, a treat. We'll go out to a restaurant to celebrate or something. Try to offer rewards. Try to make it really enticing to them so that they will have interest to read, because it is really, really difficult to compete with that. And in terms of peers, I'm going to be honest, a lot of my children's peers don't read. It's very difficult to get kids to read. Um, but I've told my kids, I know that other kids might not maybe read. Maybe other kids, they don't have that, kind of encouragement at home. But each family is different. We're going to be continuing, and I've talked to them. Be very open with your kids. I've talked to my kids that why reading is important. So I've told my kids, I want you to be smart. I want you to be at the top of your class. I want you to succeed. I want your brain to develop. I want you to be really happy and healthy and be the best you can be. I love you. I'm your mother. I care about you. And this is one of the ways that I show my love, is encouraging you to this. And I know that you might not like it right now. It might not be something you like, but this is beneficial for you. And so do you understand? And they usually, my kids will be like, yeah, we understand that. And my youngest ones, they'll try to compete with my 7-year-old, she'll come to me, she'll tell me, the 11-year-old, she didn't read today, mama, but I did. And I read 2 chapters, and it'll kind of like, and I try not to have them fight too much, even though they seem to do that a lot this summer. But that will foster that competitive nature that will get them to understand it's important. They naturally want to reach, especially in the younger ages, they want your approval. They want to be successful. They want to be the best. So when you explain to them, all these things, they will work with you towards that. And, especially if you're keeping it open to having them choose the books they like, to reading together, offering rewards. Inshallah, with time, it will develop that pathway, and you'll find these kids loving reading, even when they're resistant. My 11-year-old is very resistant. She is so reluctant all the time to read. And we've had many arguments about this topic. But, sometimes she will click with a book, and I will see her just reading it, and I will be so happy. And she'll tell me, this book was interesting. This book was different. So there's a book out there for every reader. So maybe it's just trying to discover what that book is. Just keep trying. With time, inshallah, it will help.
جزاكم الله كل خير. جزاكم الله كل خير. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sister Shifa, it was a pleasure having you with us. And this was, a wonderful lecture. Barakallah fikum. Thank you so much. We would encourage everyone to visit Noorart and visit the collection we have. And we look forward, inshallah, to carrying all the new and upcoming, editions and books that you write for us, inshallah. And may Allah, reward you and make our children benefit, bi'idhnillah, from your writing and from, the other Muslim writers out there, inshallah. And barakallah fikum. Thank you so much. And we look forward to having you again, inshallah, maybe in the near future for another talk, bi'idhnillah. Thank you so much. And thank everyone who has joined us. Jazakumullah
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll see you in the next webinar, inshallah. Barakallah fikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.